Welcome back, everyone. So you can see under the column links, there's now a design brief for medical gameplay. So I was testing a little bit in the PTU, the current medical stuff, but it's a little rough right now. For example, I know Foxy was also testing. I haven't tested this yet, but he was trying to do some of the respawns, but it wasn't, the medical gel wasn't actually showing up as being consumed. So I want to take a look, like I did with my other video, at the how many. It looks like each bed can only have one gel inserted. But then right now, if you insert the gel, you lose the ability to use your inactive menu. So it's rough. It's a real rough build. I don't know if they'll do another build before weekend starts, but at any rate, right now it's in a rough state. So let's take a look at this design brief. So I do want to cover this part here. This is more theoretical and what they kind of more of a future state type of document. Very quickly though, I'll cover over the more basic parts of it, medical gameplay, and how they're somewhat changing the current state now as we go into 4.3.1. So minor injuries, obviously pretty self-explanatory. You can usually see this stuff will become more important later on when we look at the MedGel. You can see here it's got a basic version and advanced version. But you can see it talks about some of the suggested drugs you might want to use in order to counteract whatever injury you might have. In this case, you can see this person has a tier 3 on their leg. So tier 3, it will give you a rundown on how it hampers your gameplay. Generally speaking, tier 3 is very minor, and you're really not going to notice how much of a challenge you may or may not have with your character. Additionally, again, having the medical gun, you can counteract these issues pretty easily. When you go into tier 2, you have more of a challenge, and it talks about having some of the different drugs you could use to counterbalance your issues. It would be temporarily, it would give those counterbalance, and then you would start to get, as you use those drugs, you would get a higher instance of using drugs, and you could potentially OD on those drugs. Additionally, with tier 2, that's when you have, like, you can see this person's crouched down quite a bit. You get to the point where you can't sprint, you can't do certain things. It's quite a challenge. So, and even sometimes doing jumping and things of that nature can be a real issue. So you definitely want to start to use your medical gun, or that's where having a medical gun is more advantageous, so you can use those drugs to fix that issue. I haven't seen a tier 1 in a very long time, because usually I'm already dead before that, at least I can recall. But that's a really big problem. You can see this person's on the ground, because once you get something like a tier 1 on your legs, you then lose the ability to even stand up. So again, it becomes more and more important with the higher injuries. The side effects of having those issues, the actual issues you have associated with the character, are much worse. Treatment stuff, you have med pens, which is a pretty much easy way to inject, having those on hand. The multi-tool is another option, but this is going to only be the red kind of healing juice, if you will. You don't actually have access to any drugs to do any counteracting of, again, negative modifiers you might have to your particular limb or the injury. This is where the med gun becomes more advantageous. It allows for all of these, where you can heal with the green goo, as well as you can actually inject drugs as well that can help you counterbalance those negative effects. Again, stuff like being able to aim your weapon. I think it showed with the tier 2 you can't even throw grenades anymore. So there's just some more significant challenge with those higher injuries, and you need drugs to temporarily counterbalance that. It's more of a stabilization. So as we talked about, again, there's a stabilization mechanism associated with your character, and then you also get kind of a drug counterbalance to that. Blood level does offer that. Again, those drugs, as you go higher and higher in the drugs, you'll notice more issues with your character, as well as you could potentially die. So here again is that med tool, and there is an advanced mode that you can use to interact or add medical drugs. However, you cannot do this one here. Canadyne is the anti-radiation. So if you have radiation sickness, that you cannot counterbalance that. Although with the radiation pen right now, it doesn't do a whole lot to counter radiation. It's kind of a extra use to give you a bit more time when you have really high rads. So you just use right click to kind of do the zoom in, and then use F to then switch over to the advanced mode. I think I'll probably try to put a video in here that I showed a little bit when I was shooting in the verse. I didn't have any injuries to really case it very much, but you can manually do the sliders to change the different drugs that we'll take a look at here in a second. Or you can just use advanced, and it'll autofill that. And again, it'll use this kind of the card here. It will use these suggested drugs with the suggested dosages in order to automatically apply what you need. So if you want to just use auto, that's also usually a fine option. Obviously, as you use more and more drugs, you may need to use a manual version that gives less. That way you're not actually dying of an overdose. So the red medical pen is going to be the healing, just generic, going to heal your HP back up. However, again, if you have medical issues with tier injuries, your cap on your HP is lowered. So for example, if you have a tier 3 arm, it's usually about 10% taken away. It might be 11 or 9 even. Like, I don't know if it's 91%. Sounds kind of familiar. And then torso, if you have a tier 3 torso, it's around 83 or something percent. So you start to lose the cap on your maximum of 100% HP with higher tier injuries. And the higher the tier, the lower the cap becomes. And you have, when you use the red pen, you're no longer getting 100%. You're getting whatever the cap is associated with your tier injuries. Demextrin is going to be allowing you to counterbalance muscle fatigue. Again, a lot of this stuff, essentially this is an adrenaline pen. As you can see, a lot of this stuff is going to be recommended by the injury and the card. Hopefully they'll kind of change that a bit, but for now it seemingly works. Roxafen activates to hinder movement. So if you're having an issue, I don't know why adrenaline really changes from that, but it's allowed to also help you move if you have an injury. Sterogen, which is essentially like a steroid, is to counterbalance muscle weakness, as well as issues with respiratory. So as you start to have a core damage with your torso, then you're having issues with breathing or running, and you're going to be fatigued more often and easier. Resurgera uses, it's going to be kind of to counterbalance the drug overdose issues. And then finally here again is the radiation that you could potentially have to deal with, the radiation pen, which again only comes in pen form. You can't use the medical gun to fix that issue. So they do talk about rescue beacons here. They kind of talk about overall the challenges that rescue beacons have come along, like with Pyro. Obviously, they haven't been working very well ever since 4.0. They're still dealing with that, and they're looking to make them more usable again. But essentially, if you get incapacitated or rescue beacon, then you can go about resurrecting, or you can go about getting picked up by another person through a rescue beacon. They'll talk a little bit more about this later, but as you get down to 0%, you unfortunately have to be picked up by somebody else. Would like to use this a bit more as well. This was I don't know if it's subscriber flare or just something they actually gave out to people. I can't quite recall, but I know I have it. I think it goes in your grenade slot, the medical beacon thing. Although you'd have to basically have that on hand and ready to go and drop that on the floor before someone actually comes out. Medical beds themselves, this is where obviously they're making some big changes. So they actually do talk about in this documentation the new limits again. So they have brought back limits. I think these limits changed from what they were initially. In some instances, I've already seen some feedback that some people think it's probably not far enough, especially with like tier 1. But let's take a look at them. So this is 50 kilometers. So 50 km that you can use for a tier 3 if you want to resurrect. Tier 2 is 8 mm. So was that megameters or yeah, it's not millimeters. I think it's megameters, but millions of meters. And then this one's 150 mm. So it would be nice to have gigameters in here or GMs, but unfortunately for now, they're either in km or mm. And then it talks about, using the medical assistant. Typically there's a panel as well as a panel that appears. This one, you can see with the tier 2 bed, this panel comes down. You can't see the one in the tier 1 bed. Sometimes I think the bed actually goes inside, or actually this panel may come down. Yeah, so different medical beds have different panels, but usually you have 2. Medical gel. So this is the first discussion of medical gel. It looks like we have some first insights. It's a little bit different than the original amount that I had kind of shared before, but with the tier 3 bed, you can hold, it looks like you can only hold 1 either way, which is weird because a lot of the meds have 2 areas for canisters, but I have noticed, I'll probably show a video of the Carrick that I did here, but I was able to only put 1 canister in. Again, right now, if I put that canister in, I lose the ability to interact with I can't use the F key anymore. You have to Alt F4, or actually I saw someone get knocked out and then they can do it. But anyways, it's quite a challenge right now. So tier 3 med beds can hold 100 CSCUs. Now, unfortunately, each one of these is only 100 anyways. So it can hold one of these, and it offers only 100 CSCU. And we can talk about how detrimental that is here in a minute. Tier 2 beds is 200, and then tier 1 bed is 400. So this goes a little bit against what I was saying before, that this should only offer 2 respawns. Maybe this offers 4 respawns now, because it should be 100 of this CSCU in order to respawn. You can see here, It's weird. It shows again both of them being used, but so far in the verse, I've only seen one of them being accessible for you to do a load in. Additionally, it does seem like all my ships right now are empty, which is unfortunate because when you're reclaiming your ship, you're supposed to already have it installed. So, not sure what's going on with that because these are expensive. These are 100K per pop. And again, we'll talk about some of the design brief stuff where they're going to talk about how that may change a little bit. And I'd be interested to see some of these changings going live. So you can see the medical injuries here. So it is not only required to respawn to use this goo, it's also used for tier injuries as well. So if you're using just a regular restore or kind of the food issues or addressing kind of the bleeding and stuff like that, there's no medical gel being consumed. So essentially that red, like the red pen and stuff like that, there's nothing being consumed. You just get in the medical bed, it'll heal you back up. My understanding, same thing with the kind of food and water situation. However, if you have a tear injury, fortunately or unfortunately, they're all 50 CSCU for the tier. I don't think it's per usage. Like, I don't think you have to pay 50 per issue. I think you have to pay probably 50 for every time you're sitting in the bed. So I think this needs to be kind of refined a bit. And then you can see how this is super detrimental for the tier 3 beds because you're using up half of what would be needed for a respawn. So it seems like with a tier 2 or a tier 1, you can actually do some medical gameplay as well as a respawn. Whereas with tier 3, when you do any kind of medical stuff, you're going to have to swap out that canister. And honestly, I'm not even sure you can swap out the canister if it's not already at 0%. So something will have to be further tested. So as you see here, imprinting and respawning, they again are kind of, looks like they're seemingly bringing back the max distances. So you can see those associated with each of the different medical beds. You can also see again that it's requiring 100 of the CSU of MedGel, which again is a whole canister for a tier 3. It's half a canister for a tier 2, and it's a quarter of a canister for the tier 1 bed. There comes some situations where you can't meet the condition of being able to successfully regenerate. Obviously, your med bed's destroyed. The gel's been exhausted. Medbed is outside the effective range. One thing that isn't described here is not that the medgel has been exhausted, but the medgel doesn't have enough balance left. Because again, if I had tier 3 injuries and I went to heal those, I would only have 50 CSUs available in the medbed. So we'll take a look at the design brief this design brief medical gameplay. That may be addressed in there, but we'll take a look here. So far, my question I'd like to test, but again, the gel isn't currently working in the build, but I'd be curious to see if you've done a little healing and you have 50 CSU used, can you use just 50 to res at that point? Because then that would bring it down to an effective exhaustion of that amount. So that's something we'll have to test. Then it talks about the ships of the trade. I like number 1 here because it's the Apollo. Looks very nice. Like, I think this is a pretty cool picture here, being chased by a Buccaneer. You can see again those size 4s. I don't know if they're size 3s, but I mean, we're all kind of assuming they're size 4s given how big this ship is. And these look relatively good size compared to it. Also, man, that here would look great on a Connie. So we'd love to see this. I'd love to see a Connie rework coming along with the Apollo. Yeah, because the assets I think are somewhat similar here. And then it talks about the triage here a little bit. And then, of course, you can have... This doesn't really specify you can... this is like if you chose both of the modules to be the exact same. So when it talks about 2 tier 1 beds, it means you have both modules set up for tier 1 beds. My understanding is you can mix and match these. So if you wanted to have 1 tier 1 bed and then 2 tier 2s, that's something you should be able to do. So it's the module is either 1 tier 1 bed, you can have 2 tier 2 beds, or you can have 3 tier 3 beds. Here's the MetaPen. Similar story there. That was a tier. So the MetaPen has a tier 2 bed. The Cuddy Red has 2 tier 3 beds. So similar capability to the tier 2 offered in the Anvil. This Anvil Pisces CR has a 1 tier 3, and then also 1 tier 3 as well in the Nursa. Clinics and hospitals are all fairly self-explanatory. These clinics and hospitals currently are the best kind of go-to as far as medical care, and would still be free from my understanding. All right, and then so it kind of talks about today and tomorrow here, but let's move on to the introduction of some of the design thinking. So with 4.3.1, some of this is already somewhat implemented, but from my understanding, I'm trying to understand which of this is not fully implemented yet, because there's quite a bit going on here, and there's some stuff in here that's going to be somewhat theoretical. They do mention Death of the Spaceman and wanting to bring it in, so it'll be interesting to see how they want to revise that, possibly, if at all. I don't necessarily like these flow charts because it references the same yes in this flow. I would have liked to see this heal the player brought here, and then this yes being compared in between the two. But what they're talking about here is healing, medical, hit medical gameplay and healing. Essentially, does the medbed have any conditions? Obviously, a new condition that's being used is, does it have enough gel? Whether if it does, there's any medbed conditions need to be met, then have the medbeds met that condition. If not, then the player can't heal. If it can't, if it has met those conditions, that it can be healed. Again, I like to see this set up a little bit differently. It looks fairly confusing. Similar story here. I'd like to see this laid out a bit better as well. But players incapacitated or dead. This is for regeneration. There's kind of a better UI, which we'll see down below. So if it's regeneration is valid on the condition, then yes, they can regenerate. If not, they'll need to regenerate here, which is picking a location, because one of the things they'd like to do is multiple imprints at once, which will be nice to see. And we'll see a little bit of that interface down below. So I wonder how far off this is. It's possible we might see this by the end of the year. Saying that now that we're already in September, maybe not, but at least early next year, I'd like to see this implemented. So obviously landing zones, which is like your stations. You have ships and vehicles that have their own medical beds, so that makes sense. Home bases are obviously clearly home bases. It does mention though, your own base or your own your org base if you are out doing some of the crafting stuff, so future state stuff there. And then temporary stuff like the events currently, Stormbreaker, things of that nature. So medical bed conditions. So this is some of the first look at how they would like to kind of move into doing the 4.3.1 MedGel, so that, oh, interesting. It's called, that's what I thought. So it's called Panacea MedGel here, but in game it's called Pansea. Like it's missing the A. So I knew I had seen this somewhere. So I don't know if it's actually called Panacea or if it's Pansea, because again, in the game it's called Pansea without the A here in the middle. All right, so here we are looking at MedGel requirements were added to the medical beds, providing another condition that needs to be met for successful healing and regeneration. In the future, there will be other conditions you encounter that affect or limit your ability to use a specific medbed, either owned or another player or found in the wild. There are not global conditions applied to all medbeds. These are not, global conditions applied to all medbeds, but specific states enabled by deliberate content or player actions. Additionally, some of these conditions may be found combined with one another. So as far as I can tell, this isn't implemented yet, but I'd like to see some of this. So manual MedGel. So again, Panacea MedGel is resources added. So whether or not you can go ahead and for your bed, so you can put that unit in for its functionalities. It's going to be added in 4.3.1. This auto MedGel is interesting because this requires, the medbed requires MedGel to function, but will automatically restock at a set rate. No one can manually restock the unit. So I don't know if this is happening now because you can't really interact. It's pretty limited on who can actually interact with the MedGel once it's been inserted. So yeah, I don't know if this works this way now. The way this reads is it would be a future state, but that would be pretty interesting. If you put the MedGel in, that's a one-time cost and they'll manually do it. From my understanding, this isn't happening now, but it'd be interesting to see this implemented. All right, temporary imprint. Imprint lasts for X amount of time. So let's say it's like a 30-second or a 30-minute. After imprinting, a cooldown of Y time starts before you can imprint there again. So an interesting idea here, which is a lot of things that people have thought about, is why don't we have a res timer, essentially, right? So when you res at a bed, especially at an event, right? So they do kind of talk about events down here below. But if you're resing at like the worm event, why isn't there like a 30-minute cooldown between reses? So this is where some of that stuff could potentially be incremented on. Regeneration timer, you can only regenerate at this location once every X time frame. So this again goes back to, it would be a timer for each individual, but this kind of goes back to the event thing. Delete imprints, so obviously a way to manage those imprints for anyone on that bed. Enable by event, again, going back to potentially something like Stormbreaker or maybe even using the Onyx facilities. That maybe could be a future state. Right now, they don't really allow resing at the Onyx facilities, but only functional when an event occurs or for specific timeline, right? So disable by event. So both of these are fairly relevant. So enable by event could be, hey, if a Stormbreaker or worm is active, then you can res, or maybe alternatively, it's the opposite. Like if the worm is currently active, you cannot res at that event. So if the event is live, then you can't res. Distortion is interesting, right? So this soft death are both somewhat related. So if someone's using distortion weapons on a medical area or medical bed, then you can't res because of its distortion until it no longer becomes disabled. Same thing, soft death, especially with engineering gameplay coming along. There should be an ability to go from soft death back to full life. And so having the ability to re-enable a soft death ship is not possible now, but in a future state it would be, and then that would potentially make it so you can then enable being able to resurrect. Distance. So obviously they're bringing that distance in. So if you're outside of the scope of that X distance, then you wouldn't be able to use the med bed. The fees part is interesting. Now this one's not player defined. The one right below it is, but using a fee. So if you're at the warm event, maybe if it's 100K to do a res, and if you can't do that, then you can't do the res. So having a fee associated with each of the reses. Same thing again, player defined fees. So let's say you have your own medical bed and you want someone to res at it. I don't know how this will be fully implemented because generally speaking, I don't know. I just right now, so you're going to have an Apollo nearby that people would be able to res at for an event. This one doesn't quite make sense. I mean, it's not like fueling, right? Where you like go out and about, then it's like, well, I expect to die. Like I expect to need fuel, or even I didn't expect I need fuel. At least you're able to like call out and you're live. You can't, after you've died, you can't set up your imprint. So I just don't understand how they want to sell the service of resing. A medical beacon is one thing. Again, that's again retroactive because you weren't expecting to die. I don't know how you plan on selling like, hey, here's a medical bed. Maybe you can rent out a nurse to somebody, then you can get fees gathered up that way. That's the only thing I can kind of maybe think of is like renting a ship out. But you would think that would be included in the renting costs of someone taking it out. It's kind of like say renting a vehicle and saying, hey, but you don't have the steering wheel or something. I don't know. It seems weird to me. It's like renting something and then not having the capability of it. Permission editable. So in this case, people can go ahead and edit who can spawn there. And then destructible, destructing the bed. Medbed permissions. So obviously only yourself for anyone, which overrules the options below, which would potentially be if you want to set it to just friends, just party members, or just workmates, which right now is not a current state. So here's the interface that they're looking to change out. So game chat's still available, which is good because you would need that to set up a medical beacon and chatting with people. Incapacity text, which I think is pretty big and on the top now. We've moved to the bottom corner down here. Sorry, dry throat. And then down here we have a generation location. So obviously this one offering up 4 locations here. Here's a hospital. There's a vehicle that he's got set up, and then a base name. So maybe this is a satellite station. A temporary one, maybe set up at the worm event, like I mentioned before, or just do a deploy medical beacon because you need help. And then there's actually an option to minimize. And that way, if you want to minimize this and look around you to see what's going on, it's always been kind of weird. You can see what's going on around you when you're dead. That doesn't quite make sense to me, but at any rate, maybe if a drone had launched or something and that drone was invulnerable, maybe that would make sense. But anyways, you can minimize this to continue to use the rest of your screen. It may even increase the chat window here a bit. And this is just giving a rundown of what I kind of mentioned before up above. Rescue beacons, as mentioned before, after 4.0, they're a bit of a hot mess. So these are kind of the reasons why they're busted, to be honest. So if you want to take a look through this, please do. But for now and the road to 1.0, it looks like medical beacons they haven't quite figured out yet, but we'll have to see if they're at least somewhat enabled in some sort of state in 4.3.1. Additionally, they kind of talk about first responders here. Again, this is kind of like we want first responders to be better, but they do realize that unlike mining, salvaging, transport, racing, combat, like they don't really have plans to have medical gameplay as like its own game loop, which for me is a bit unfortunate. I'd like to be able to see an NPC mission, think of like the 890 jump mission. I forgot what they call that one specifically, but essentially terrorist or some sort of a pirate crew takes over that ship, but everybody's already dead. So you're just going in there and you're killing the pirates that have taken it over, but nothing really happening. You're just killing them. Sometimes some of the guards are still alive, but you're not really restoring anything with that ship, and nothing comes back to pick that ship up. So it's a bit of an odd mission if you really think about it, but you can kind of take it back over. But again, you don't really take it over. You're just kind of killing all the people that killed others on it, and then you just leave it the way it is. So what I'll mean by that is that it'd be great to be able to have a mission where you can actually show up to a ship like that and start to resurrect people, right? That would be, or do healing and triaging people. Maybe you've got a timer and you have to go around and heal the tier 1s first before they bleed out or things of that nature. That'd be pretty cool. That isn't what this is saying at all. It's just kind of saying we know that first responders want to have gameplay. We're sorry it's not here, but it's still in our idea, like in our heads. We have some ideas of how we fix it going forward. That's about it. Thank you all for checking the video. I look forward to in the future, hopefully being able to do more looking at the PTU testing. Feel free, I will link this documentation in the description below, and I'll link the comlink as well. I'll overall link to this. Both of these are in the same comlink area, so you can just go back and forth between the two and then use these subheaders to get to the sections that I was referring to, and we kind of briefly overview. Anyways, thank you all for checking the video. Catch y'all next time.